এবং এটাকে একটু প্রচার করুন। ধন্যবাদ।
আমি এই সাইডে দেখতে পাচ্ছি না, তো তোমরা বলে ফেলবো।
This is probably a good idea, a good time for me to sort of steam in with various suggestions I've had. My name is Zafar Saban. I used to be, until very recent, people who read these publications in national consciousness. And it's certainly, I've always looked at the Writers Collective as a great source of material. I think some of my best writers and the best pieces have been from Writers Collective efforts, people sitting around the table, people who aren't here as well. But Syed, for instance, is very sorry to miss him. He's been one of the superb contributors. Now, I'm no longer at the Daily Star Forum. I moved over to the independent group, and I'm doing a number of things for them. The relevant job I have right now is working at the independent newspaper in the and part of what I'm doing for both of them is to revamp their op-ed pages and essentially their comment and analysis sections. And of course, I should just plug at this point that the Independent is in the middle of a large relaunch. In about a month and a half, it's planning to come very big. And so right now probably there's not much there, just to inspiration, but we hope in a month and a half's time, the idea that there'll be opportunities on the pages of the Independent will be something that should be very attractive to people around this table. Anyway, the plan I've had, I've talked with both Asif, and I think I mentioned his name as well, and one of the things we've thought of is somehow trying to bridge this gap between online media and blogs, and also the regular newspapers, because I think there is this divide somehow, because a lot of people don't read blogs. So how do we get that information out to them? This conversation, this debate, it's often occurred to me when I'm seeing some of the very interesting debates which happen on Unheard Voice. I think the last one which really caught my attention was an Irene Khan wrote piece for the Daily Star that generated, I think, some 70 comments. And I think starting with the piece and then looking at the back and forth in the comment section, this was a really interesting and useful discussion. But it occurred to me that Daily Star readers would have read the original piece, perhaps, by Irene, but they wouldn't have actually been privy to the back and forth of the comments, and that's something which they would have missed out on. So is there any way we can sort of bridge this gap? And one of the things which I'd like to do, and I mentioned this, is that I'd like to bring the Unheard Voice blog onto the pages of the Independent. And I think it would be a really good mutually beneficial relationship. The advantage of Unheard Voice, what I have in mind, is that every time there's a blog entry, we wait for maybe a day, 2 days until there's a 10 or 12 comments, or enough comments that we can fill a page with it, and then we'll run a page called Unheard Voice. So we'll have the original blog entry, then we'll have the comments, 10 or 12, and then at the end we'll have sort of a little note saying that this conversation is still going on. Please join the conversation at unheardvoice.net/blog. So that draws more people in, more non-traditional blog readers who may not have necessarily read the blog in the past. Now, having read this in a traditional media forum, may now go back. And I think it's that's one way of talking about bridging the gap you were talking about. And I also think it's about time that we bridge the gap between traditional media and non-traditional online media. And this is sort of one way of doing it. And I think also from a promotional point of view, in just getting Unheard Voice and the message and out there, this would also be fairly invaluable. It's true that a lot of people do read it, but I think especially with perhaps the older generation, with the ex-chief advisor notwithstanding, we need to make more of a push to try and bring them in. So, again, bridge that gap between people who read the blogs and people who read the newspapers. And this is one way of doing it. So this is an idea that I've had. So I'm able to share it with everyone. I've talked with a few people in Drishtipat about it before, but we'd be very interested to get other people's ideas, feedback, whether you think this is a good idea, bad idea, what possible pitfalls they may be for the unwary, which we haven't seen yet. Thank you.
Dina?
Dina Siddiqui, Gavashok, kind of at large. Immediately useful comment, which is also typical, but it kind of follows up on what Samia Zaman was saying. It's indirectly related to that. I will say first that I found Unheard Voice is very, very useful, especially at times when the traditional media and even traditional spaces for talking have been quite stifling and very polarized. Unheard Voices has really provided some complexity, some nuance, different opinions, and people actually listen when they're talking to each other. That's all good. I just want to put in a word of caution about how we shouldn't think about the blog as an entirely neutral space, which is, I think, what you were saying, or romanticize it too much, because there's still a lot of power relations involved in that. So I want to get to the question of that Asif asked about should we monitor the traditional news media. I think before we can do that, we have to ask who the we is, what kind of ideologies we share or don't share. There is a little bit of a tendency to assume, and this is not necessarily only specific to UV, is to assume that we all agree on everything. There is one progressive point of view. There's one progressive analysis, and that does tend to close down the conversation. And I think there needs to be a little bit more reflection. Again, as I said, this is not going to help anybody immediately, but a little bit more self-reflexivity for all of us. I would include myself in this, on where we're coming from and what we want and what we share and where our differences are. I think would be useful to think about. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Zavid Mansur of Drishtipat blog, Unheard Voice. In 2006 to most of 2007, I was extremely involved. আমি একটা কমেন্ট করতে চাই about from my own experience about comments. মানে জাফর একটাকে বললো যে আরিফ খানের পোস্টটাতে there were 70 plus comments and maybe 20 of them were from me. Because it was an issue very, very, it was very close to my heart, and I couldn't stop myself going back and checking the Kiki Liche. And if I didn't agree, I always had to come back and write something about it. And every time I wrote, I told myself, actually, this is the last time I'm going to make a comment. But then somebody else would write something that, and then অনেক সময় অনেকে চ্যালেঞ্জ করে যে হয়তো কিছু লিখছে যে this is a fact, and I'm like, no, it's not. And so I go back and do the research and come back to here's the proof, here's the link to the website, and go do your own research. So আগে 2006 আমার মনে আছে the blog Unheard Voice was still new, and some of us আমরা যেটা moderate করতাম. Moderation is the process যেটা সামিয়া জামানের বাড়ি ভাই একসময় বলেছেন যে it's unfiltered. আমি কিন্তু caution করে দিতে চাই the word unfiltered, not to use it because it's not entirely unfiltered. এই জন্য আমরা ওই moderation processটা inbuilt করেছি যে in fact Drishtipat's blog, if you post a comment, there's a waiting period. It doesn't go online right away. You'll get an instant message that says it's on queue. Somebody, one of the editors or writers will read it and approve it. তো এটা আমাদেরকে হেল্প করে যে ওই পার্সোনাল অ্যাটাকস গুলো আমরা তখন একটু ডিলিট করতে পারি যে আর একটা জিনিস আমাদের প্রথম খুব অসুবিধা হতো আমাদের যারা ক্লোজ ফ্রেন্ড যারা হয়তো কমপ্লিটলি ডিসএগ্রি করছে কারো কমেন্টের সাথে তারা আমাদের খুব অ্যাংরি মেইল পাঠাতো যে why did you allow it? যে you know it's blatant lies. যেমন কোন কতগুলো ব্যাপার আছে, ফর এক্সাম্পল সবার জন্য একটা সেন্সিটিভ ইস্যু, যে এই সামনে আমাদের 15th August আসছে, এই জন্য মনে পড়লো যে কোন একটা somebody condemned killer of absconding justice for so many years, and তাদের পরে যারা তারা হয়তো একটা কমেন্ট দিচ্ছে, oh no he was innocent, he was not even close to ধানমন্ডি road number 32 on that day. তখন বাকিরা হয়তো বলছে যে can't believe you allowed this. তখন আমাদের, আমি আসিফ, আমরা কয়েকজন যারা মডারেটর ছিলাম, আমাদের কমেন্ট ছিল to our friends যে we cannot stop people's voice, but you have the option to go back and say you are lying, I know better truth, AJ so you go back, instead of telling us stop their voices, you go back online and tell them no, we have facts, this is not true. But আমরা ওই মডারেশনটা রেখেছি যে যাতে আমরা ওই পার্সোনাল অ্যাটাকস or slang languages গুলো আমরা একটু ফিল্টার করতে পারি. As far as filtering goes, that's what we do. But we do not, মানে আমি হয়তো একটা কিছু লিখছি, তার এগেইনস্টে কেউ একজন কমপ্লিটলি ডিসএগ্রি করে লিখলো, we will never stop that. সেটাই বলছি আর কি, Unheard Voice. So it's again open, but then again we try to maintain